history book and get another. Gosh, what an intro. Beautiful.
Hello, Marchell. How are you?
Very
Thanks
well
for joining me.
Yes.
Well, I'm very excited to talk to you because I've read your book and got markers and everything, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's full of things I just had no idea about. And I'm like Alice in Wonderland. I like pictures. I don't know if you can see lots of pictures, maps, photos. So that's an added bonus. But it's really, yes. I'm going to have to reread it, I think, several times. It's full of information.
There's a lot of information in it.
A lot. Yes. It must have taken you an age to write.
Funnily enough, no. I started the research for it about 10 years ago. I was looking for Wilson and Blackett's books, and about 20 years ago, I'd read, like many people, this wonderful book, The Holy Kingdom, which they co-wrote with Adrian Gilbert. And that really got me thinking, because the emphasis was on not finding Brutus from the classical sources, but from the Welsh sources. And I've since discovered that I actually have more Welsh blood in me than English, but up to that point, I had no idea about this. So that's another story. And the Welsh slant to it all was what really got me going. So I tried to find, in fact, I managed to find a couple more books by Wilson and Blackett. And there I was, nose deep in the rabbit hole, and with a torch and pen and paper and everything. And I started making notes about Brutus, really from what I found about him in the Holy Kingdom. And then I found from one of Wilson and Blackett's books these two genealogies. I mean, there are many, many genealogies, but they're the two really important ones. And I'm bound to get this the wrong way around. I have a lousy memory, by the way, so forgive me. The two really important genealogies are the genealogy of Iestyn Gwrgan, and the gosh, I've forgotten its name. Isn't that awful? Anyway, there are two really important genealogies that I found in one of Wilson and Blackett's books, and in one of them is Bruce the Warlike. But he's not in the 1100s, and I thought, well, this is a bit strange. So I started finding old historians like Gildas and Nennius. And Nennius was absolutely blew me away. Gildas, he concentrates, because he was a Roman Catholic, he concentrates on how dreadful the British were, and Boadicea was a deceitful lioness and all this sort of stuff. But he has his uses. But in Nennius, I found this amazing assertion, and then repeated again by Nennius, that Brutus was a Roman consul. And so I did some more digging, and I found Livy. And in Livy is Brutus's entire history and background from the Roman point of view. So it's after that I began to do a chronology of what I could find about the dates and how they fitted in with the genealogies. And I started to write. I suppose I did about 5,000 words on him. And then Wilson and Blackett's books disappeared, and I couldn't get them out of the library. And I was told by my otherwise excellent library in Scotland that head office had withdrawn them, and they wouldn't say why. And I looked on the internet, and they were £1,000, and that's silly money. So I dropped it for a while, and then I thought about 10 years ago, well, I'll have another look. So I found that Wilson and Blackett's books were being republished by Cymryglyphics down in southwest Wales, and for a reasonable price, about £25. So I bought the missing volumes that I needed, And they came with the most wonderful handwritten letter from Ross Broadstock, whose publishing company it was. And he said, we were doing that maddening thing that older people do in a camper, going off and traveling. And he said, if you're down our way, come and stay, because we've got room and we could do some work together. And so that's what we did. We were supposed to go for about, 4 to 6 weeks, and we ended up staying for 8 months. And he made me, I say he made me, he was a very persuasive man, Ross, and I'm not naturally, I'd rather be working on a book than talking, because I have such a bad memory, and I think it irritates people. It certainly irritates me. But he suggested, let's put it like that, he suggested that I have a YouTube channel. He did some interviews with me, and I gave him what I'd done so far on Brutus. And he came storming in, waving it. He said, "You've got to turn this into a book. It's absolutely you've got to turn this into a book. You've got to do Albyne as well." So I thought, oh God, here we go. And that was the genesis of it, really. And I didn't read anything other than the British histories and 1 or 2 Roman histories, because I wanted to keep my mind absolutely clear. I didn't want any preconceptions. And so that's really how it started. And then, having told Ross to do an index for the, was it one of the books he produced for Wilson and Blackett, and he never let me forget it. I then realized I would also have to do an index for this, and it nearly killed me. I nearly threw the whole thing into the sea.
I am so grateful for it, though. I was just using it literally.
Well, it has some errors, I'm afraid. My own copy of the publications is absolutely full of annotations and notes to go into the next edition. I've scribbled all over it, and it's, as you can see, I've got thingies, and but there is. Being a very logical person and also having Asperger's, I don't like other people's opinions, because they mean nothing to me. I don't understand how people can have an opinion that isn't based on the available facts. And this is quite tiresome for the people one lives with, but there it is. And also, my father was educated in the way that most men were in the 1930s, in Greek and Latin, and he taught me to construct words, which was the beginning of my journey as an archaeographer, as I coined the expression archaeography. And his father read logic at Edinburgh before the First War. So to me, a fact is, if it's not provable as far as the timescale will allow you to prove it, it's admissible, but not if it comes from a secondary source or if it's spouted by somebody else. A lot of academics, unfortunately, don't check their sources.
Not a secondary source, then, but what about a disputed source?
It depends on why it's been disputed. And having the nose of a mongoose, and again, I was taught very early to go and look things up. In other words, to find things out for myself and to think for myself. Just because somebody said, "Oh, this is disputed," I would want to know why. Again, my father said, "Always ask why. It'll make you very unpopular, but that can't be helped." And so that's a maxim I've by all my life, and no, it hasn't made me terribly popular in certain quarters, but it does come up with the goods. And you find that people dispute things for the most, to me, peculiar reasons, because they don't like the person who's presenting an opposing point of view, or they've actually misread it altogether. And I trained as a legal proofreader, you see, so I've got a forensic eye for detail, yes. And all in all, these rather strange and absolutely not mainstream influences combined to turn me into the sort of researcher that digs up things sometimes that are hanging on by their fingernails, as Wilson and Blackett did. I'm not likening myself to them, because their work is absolutely astounding, but it's the same process. They went and resuscitated British history that was on life support. And based on their work and the existing British records, like Aeneas, Gildas, Geoffrey of Monmouth, whom everybody roars with laughter at, but he was actually a translator. He wasn't an historian, although in the medieval way, and of course he was a Roman Catholic as well. This matters at that stage in history because they altered things. Sometimes were obliged to alter things to suit what the church, said and did, and wanted other people to say and do. And then there was, other people like William Camden, who has his uses, although he was no friend to the British legends. And what I found really compelling was the way these stories just refused to lie down and die. And to me, that says there's a kernel of truth in this, and I want to find out what it is. So there I was with my remit from Ross, and we went home to Scotland, and I put Brutus to one side, and I started looking into the Sumerian side of things, and using, as I say, my own approach, which is not mainstream at all. I mean, to me, peer review is very dangerous because it's basically saying I won't publish anything if you haven't agreed with my findings. You see what I mean? In science, maybe it's different, but in history and that sort of thing, there's a lot writing. Sorry?
It's very difficult to go against a paradigm or and a dogma.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an awful lot riding on keeping our British history suppressed because they don't want us to remember who we were. And if you don't know who you were, you can't possibly know completely who you are. So I cut myself off, which was easy in the northeast of Scotland, and got on with the first draft of this. And then I sent it to Ross. And he said, "This is wonderful. I'm going to publish it, please." I said, "Yes, please." And that was all arranged. And then, very, very sad to say, we lost him, as you probably know. And bang went a friend and an editor and a publisher all in one go, which was for his family an absolutely tragic loss, and for British history. So I rather sort of felt I had to pick up a bit of a torch and run with it. And the result is the Great Migration. So any errors really are all mine, from writing of it to the proofreading of it to the index, and all the rest, all my errors.
Well, that's a killer combination. On the one hand, you have this eye for detail, an eye for logic, mind for logic, and on the other hand, you are a questioner. The two don't always go together. You're questioning, but you're analysing. And that's
and I want to know also something else that mainstream people tend to leave out is the likelihood of something. Now, human nature remains human nature. It doesn't matter now whether it was now or 3,500 years ago. If a man reveals himself to be a certain sort of man, and then people attribute things to him that don't seem natural to him, you can dismiss this as speculation, but it isn't really. In the old days, when the police were less politicized than they are now, likelihood or not, and the MO, the modus operandi, were both really, really important. Oh, you've got a friend.
So that's the postman and my dog reacting.
Oh, that's fine. No, that's very nice. So yes, the likelihood. And that's really the foundation of it. Very independent and I think a very original approach, because I don't like being told what to think. Who knows what the motive is?
And I think that's the way it should be. We shouldn't be told what to think. I find that
how to think
myself.
Yeah, how to think, but not what to think. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I think that even I wouldn't impose any of my views on even anyone in my family. Like it's their business what they think. I just think we should have our own views and we should question things. And so that's one aspect. That's just one aspect, but it's one aspect that I really liked about the book, because you're figuring things out for yourself. You're looking at the evidence in the light of your experience, in the light of your training, your logic, and you're asking them questions. So
yes, and also I didn't go to university. I've got 2 very dubious A levels from a time when they were still academic, and one of those was a retake. So I am not up there with the, the highbrow academic people who go and get PhDs in whatever you can name. But I do have, thanks to my mother, who was a translator at the what do they call it in Geneva, Association of Linguists. She was a translator in French and Russian, so a really good brain. And I do have a scholarly approach, again, thanks to my father. A scholarly approach is absolutely essential. And nobody seems to know the difference now between being scholarly. Anybody can be scholarly. It just means being rigorous about your approach to things. Sorry, that's not very well put. But
no, I agree, and that's actually the reason I wanted to start this series of interviews and chats, because I want to listen, and I want other people to listen to people doing independent research, because being in a university is great in some ways, but it comes with blinkers and it comes with pressures. You're not actually allowed to say what you think sometimes, but also you're trained to think in a certain way. It's very, very narrow. And history, you wouldn't think, because history really means story. You wouldn't think it would come with so many dogmas, but it absolutely does. And that's one thing I found very interesting.
Well, yes, and particularly the British thing. I started this book with a quotation from Aeneas, who was, as I think I put it, back in the 800s. So we're talking over 1,000 years ago. He was lamenting the dullness of the British, even then, because they had then forgotten who they were. And when I read that, I almost thought, right, I'm going to stick to knitting or take up gardening or something, because I don't see how I can possibly make any difference when 1,200 years ago an historian was already lamenting the fact that the British have forgotten who they are. But there seems to be a hunger for this sort of knowledge to fill the gap. And I'm really quite surprised and delighted, of course, by the success the Great Migrations has had, because it does fill a really important gap without negating, what the Romans achieved, although I suppose I come across as a bit anti-Roman. I'm not really anti-Roman per se. I just get rather cross with them taking all the credit for things that were actually our inventions.
Maybe that's something I came across with my work, looking at the different connections between the various places of the UK and Britain and Ireland, shall we say, and how the roads are often called Roman roads, but they're not necessarily Roman in the origin. No. And that's just one example. And actually, you talk a lot about these connections between places in your book, Watling Street and etc. etc.
Yes.
And they're very, very old. It's very hard to put a date on them, but they're very old.
It's far older than people think. I mentioned the paved stretch of road that was found in a quarry near Telford in Shropshire, which puts paid to the notion that the Romans brought the idea of paved roads here. They didn't. We already had them. And in Catterick, I think I also mentioned it in the Great Migrations, in Catterick in Yorkshire, they found a stretch of what we think of as Ermine Street, which is actually the Fosse Way, according to the old historians. And they found a stretch of road there, exactly where you'd expect it to be, with the remains of a hostelry, which is very Sumerian, dating from 10,000 years ago. So that's long pre-Brutus and long pre-Albyne as well.
Yeah. Well, talking about Albyne and also Brutus, so these are the two main parts of the book. So we have two major figures.
Yes.
So I had a quick look to see what I had already on my bookshelf. So I found something that isn't really relevant, but a little bit relevant. So it's this book by Geoffrey Ashe. But then I realized I'd been confusing in my mind Albyne with Albion. So I had to correct that mistake. And in fact, your index was very useful for that.
We'll come back to that.
I also found the Wace and Layamon's Layamon the Brute and So the Roman de Brut and the Le Mans Brut as well. You can't see with the light, I know, but
no, but I know the names. Yes, indeed, I can. That you'll be better off with them than Geoffrey Ashe. I hope he's not watching. Better off with him.
I think he's long gone now, but this is definitely a 60s take, and full of the Arthurian myth. Whereas this is they're not exactly new publications. These are very old stories. But I'd forgotten about them. I used to be really, really into this book. In fact, it's a book I borrowed from a university library and never returned. But it's really late now, and I just realised that. But it's absolutely fantastic. It's a brilliant story, and it's so evocative. So, what can you tell us then about these? First of all, should we start with Brutus?
Well, now I have to go back to my own. He wrote the Geste de Briton Wace, and I see he's on page 202. I do hope I've got this right, because he, I've got it down here, the Brut or Chronicle of England, which is the only British history that actually has the Albyne legend in it. As a serious piece of history, although it's very, as I've said, very medievally florid and moralizing. But this precious English record, yes, edited by Friedrich Brie in 1906. The relevant part, which was the first that has the story of Albyne in it, was, and I put this in inverted commas, a mere translation of the French Brut d'Angleterre. And that is a poem rendered in translation into prose by this 12th century Norman poet called Wace. So how it got out to, he says, I've said he's supposed to have based it on Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. But, and this is really important, I just had to read what I've written. I hope that's all right.
Go on, please.
In Geoffrey's history, there's no mention of Albyne whatsoever.
Yes, that's exactly what Geoffrey Ashe says. Albion as a person does not appear in Geoffrey.
Yes, but she does in the Brut, which is based on Wace's poem. So my thinking was, I said there's no mention of Albyne in Geoffrey's history, a strange piece of crucial information to Geoffrey to have left out, especially as Wace includes this long entry for Albyne, which makes its way into the Brut, as edited by Friedrich Brie. My own guess is that, like Perceforest, it was taken to France by Britons. I say France, it should be Brittany or Normandy, because Wace was Norman. It was taken by Britons fleeing the comet and persisted in oral form for some centuries before finally being written down and preserved, however imperfectly. And one wonders, I've put, how many more precious British records found their way to Brittany, Armorica, for safety. But I mentioned Albion.
Yes.
No, the really important thing that ties both Brutus and Albyne together as progenitors of our island nation is this king list that I discovered in Holinshead's Chronicles.
Yes.
And I can explain a bit about that if you'd like me to.
Yes, yeah.
Holinshead was one of, I think it was 5 editors of the notes compiled by John Leland. And this turns out to be really important because John Leland was commissioned by Henry VIII to go on a long journey around the country, finding all the secrets and mysteries that were being concealed by the grand families of the time. And they were also hidden in libraries and monasteries and so forth. Yeah. And so off, you know about John Leland's tour, I expect, his itinerary.
Yes. Well, I know the name, and then I've heard you talk about it already. But he discovered something in a library, right?
Well, this is my conjecture, yes, because we have people like Richard Lynch, who based his Travels of Noah in Europe on the same piece of information. And that piece of information was the fragments of Berossus, who they were found in the Vatican Library by Agnio di Viterbo. Again, it's all in the book. It's quite convoluted, and it's quite a sort of medievally. Well, it's not very pleasant because of the Vatican found out what he was doing, and he died by then. And he was basically just translating this Babylonian work, which has a huge bearing on our connection with Sumer. And the Romans didn't like that because it's very, very complex. But everything that we gave them, they took and like Christianity and called it their own, made it their own, and created a sort of myth around it. But John Leland found, I think he found somewhere this king list, and it goes all the way back to Noah. And when Holinshead and his fellow editors were collating all Leland's notes, and not all of them made it out into the public domain. What we call Holinshead's Chronicles is a very small amount of Leland's work, but it included this king list. And although Brutus is at the wrong time, they put him in the 11th century, and I go into the reasons for that in the Great Migrations. The really, really significant thing about Albion or Albyne is that at the right time in the king list is a giant called Albion. Now, Albyne, our progenitrix from Sumer, is also associated with giants. And what really made me think of... sorry?
No, I'm just agreeing.
Oh, no. What really made me think that I had another piece of evidence here was the fact that on the one hand, we have Albion, who, although is put down as a man, we have Albyne at the same time in the British records. He's a giant, she's associated with giants. And that ties in with the Hugh Gadarn thing as well. He comes from overseas, she comes from overseas, and he's associated with the number 33, and so is Albyne. And at this distance in time, I'm going to call that evidence. So that was an incredibly important piece of information, along with the entry for Albyne as daughter of a Syrian king, for me to hang the structure of the book on. And it really, it sounds a bit airy-fairy, but indeed it wasn't. It led to all sorts of things. The importance of not discounting the sort of information that academics discount because, it's outdated, or we know better now. 10 to 1, we don't know better now. And I found this with, I don't know if you're familiar with Brewer's Phrase and Fable, are you? Wonderful source. Yes. Well, I've got a copy, an edition that's a facsimile of one from about 120 years ago. And I compared it with a modern version, and all the really interesting things that helped me on my journey have been taken out of the modern version because modern editors think that this is nonsense and it needn't be included. And so many times, over and over and over again, I have found that nugget that is missing from the modern versions is the one thing I needed to help me on the next leg of my journey.
I totally agree. And for me, it's the same with Encyclopedia Britannica. I always go to the 1911 version.
Oh, good for you. What really started me again on my journey was this magnificent tome. I seem to be back to front. You're the right way.
You're fine. You're fine. It's absolutely legible.
Is it right? Well, this is the new edition. I think it's 1904. But this is this wonderful etymological dictionary. Again, I've scribbled all over it. My notes are sort of everywhere in the margins, and it's my own findings where I agree with Professor Skeet, who was an eminent etymologist, which I am not. But there are times when his findings don't go deep enough, and I was able to take them far deeper, and that is always very gratifying. And the avenues that this connection that words have, the avenues that opened up in front of me were blinding sometimes. And all the information that came pouring out, really sometimes, I've said this before, but I really felt as though I was trying to stuff a duvet into a pillowcase. And there's necessarily an awful lot of information left out of this, which is going to go into Finding the Phoenix, the more esoteric angles, because I was trying very hard to discipline myself and stick to the, this is what happened to Brutus, this is what happened to Albyne.
So this is your book that's coming out at Easter?
Well, Easter, no, which Easter? I'm a very, very, very slow worker. It won't be this Easter, I'm afraid. At least I don't think it will. Well, no, I'm very sorry. This was a year late, but I'll do my best. The further one goes back in time, the more people were connected to what we nowadays call religion. And I'm sure with your background, you'll know exactly what I mean. For them, it was a way of living. Mm-hmm. And it was not a series of empty rites and ritual learnings that, mm-hmm. pouring of things and learning things by heart. It has its value, I suppose, but that isn't true religion. True religion is feeling your way into your own talents, your own role in on this sphere, what God wants you to do. Call him what you like. I have a Christian background, so I call him God. But it's attuning yourself so that you can bring your talents out to their highest degree. And I know if I'd got, just to be personal a moment, I know if I'd gone to university, then this book would never ever have been written. Mm-hmm. I'd have got lost in a sea of people far brighter, far cleverer, and with a much better memory than me. But because I was consistently baffled at every turn, I went the way that true religion meant me to go, and this book is the result. I hope that makes sense. But they lived by it. They could feel the energies. Fewer people today can feel those energies. Yes, I had an amazing experience today.
What's this all most people's conception of a religion, at least in the big monotheisms, and what the universities might have in common is this deference to authority. And in religion you have these various councils that decree what people are going to believe. Yes. And it's not that different in the university.
It's a very un-British thing. The Welsh still, and the Scots also, will meet you, be you Duke or Dustman, they will meet you as an equal. And they will treat you as an equal. And my father was Scots, and that's how I was brought up. And everybody, until they, prove otherwise, is to be treated with the same respect. It doesn't matter what walk of life they come from. Deference, I don't know. I would defer to anybody who has earned the right to be deferred to and really earned it. I don't mean, as an, this is the problem I had with authority. Hence my rather checkered academic career. I did not defer to authority just because the school rules said I should. And I made a couple of notes. I printed your email, and I made a couple of notes here.
Go on then, please tell me what you were going to say.
When I was about 8, I asked somebody, one of the mistresses at school, why is this word spelt the way it is? And she actually didn't understand the question. Now, by the time I was 8, I already knew how to deconstruct a word into prefix, root, and suffix. And I wanted to know whether the root did it come from Galicia? Was it Greek? Was it Latin? Was it Old French? What was it? My father would have told me, you see, and or told me to go and look it up. And after that, I seriously lost respect for authority just because it was there. And it got me into a whole heap of trouble. I was never actually expelled anywhere, but it was a close run thing sometimes. But why? I mean, I have a great friend who is a teacher, and he he treats the children as junior equals, and they adore him.
Mhm.
And he has to
Yeah.
put up with, people who just put their foot down and because it's the rules. Well, why? It's a silly rule.
Mhm.
I didn't mean
Yeah.
to be awkward. It's just the way I'm made.
I think that's great.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that Brutus was a kindred spirit in that regard. What would you say?
Oh, absolutely. The one thing, Brutus was not only warlike, but he was a very slippery, cunning man. And if you take this story of the prophecy that he's supposed to have heard from Diana. Now, I go into this in great detail in the book because there are two wildly differing accounts of this, and they were so interesting. One is the ordinary standard version that you get in Percy Enderby and Geoffrey of Monmouth and all the rest of them. There he was on Lefkada, and he went to the Temple of Diana, and he got this prophecy that he was to go to the island in the far west, and there he would, maidens would chant to Diana down the ages and all the rest of it. And the one in the Colbryn is a complete fabrication. I don't mean the Colbryn is fabricated. I mean the whole thing was a setup by Brutus, I think, because he knew that if he got he would never be able to get his elders to agree to something simply because he ordered it. So he got a girl, Laban the armourer's daughter, to hide and to pretend to be the voice of Diana, because he knew that they would accept a religious, a mystical proclamation like that, whereas independent Britons that they wouldn't accept an order simply from Brutus because he chose to give them one. So
similar to kings claiming their authority from spiritual and supernatural sources.
Well, I don't know. It worked because he managed to get his fleet here, but it was a very, very clever piece of trickery, like the piece of trickery that got him away in one piece after the Battle of Ars Silvia, when he managed to get away with all his money that his uncle, the last Etruscan king, had sequestered. He managed to get away with his money and rouse up this army. And very necessary it was because of the civil war that was going on in Britain at the time. And Brutus is
that's an interesting thing. Like, that's always interesting to come into a country at the time of division.
Well, I think he was sent for,
right.
Because there's again we haven't got. We'll have to come back to this. I've probably been waffling too much. I find it terribly difficult to confine myself. There's so much interesting stuff out there. Brutus was the lineal descendant of Lear, 7th generation down from Lear's daughter Regan, and the elder line of the British kings came to an end, and I think he was summoned. And there's a character who everybody accepts as a man in his own right. I think, and I go into this in the book in great detail, I don't think that Dyfnwal Moelmud was a separate man. I think the name was a nom de guerre for Brutus himself, because he has the same characteristics. He's at the right time, and nowhere is he mentioned in any of the genealogies. Now, this is the really crucial thing. Dyfnwal Moelmud is not in the Welsh genealogies. Now, there are people called that. I found one called that, but much, much later on. AD, I think he is. So we're talking best part of 1,000 years later. Dyfnwal Moelmud himself, I think it means the tonsured one from the east. And people of Brutus's stature were tonsured at this stage, and so it was really, if you think of a garment, that's worn so much and so patched and so faded and torn and stitched together the wrong way round, and bits have been added until you barely can see what the original material was like. That's what our history was like. And what I've done is I hope, a job of restoration on it by putting the patches back in their right place, fitting them in, darning a bit here, with, I hope, with sympathy and not speculating too much, always considering the likelihood of the thing. Is it likely that this man, is it likely that there should have been two sovereigns paramount at roughly the same time? Of course not. You just don't, and the sovereign paramount means high king. You're not going to have one and then another called by somebody completely different, a completely different name, who doesn't even appear in the genealogies.
So what can you tell, as far as you know, about the political or social situation on the island of Britain when Brutus arrived? So you mentioned war, fighting,
yes,
conflict.
Civil war. There was a very old king called Gorvod, and again, he's in all the king lists and the genealogies. We know he existed, and he had twin sons, Fer and Por, known in the Brutus, Porrex and Ferrex, simply Por Rex. King Por and King Fer, and they, as I say, they fought like jackals over the throne, and one of them was murdered by his mother, and the whole thing was just such a disaster that the elders said, "That's it, we're not having either of you or your lineage. That's it." And I think they sent. We have to remember that the ancient world was much more connected than we think it is. And they'll have stayed connected. Britain will have stayed connected with what was going on in Italy at the time. It's quite a thing when a line of Etruscan kings is deposed and a republic is, and there will have been letters going backwards and forwards, envoys going backwards and forwards. This has happened throughout history. It's nothing new to us. Nothing that we've invented. And I think somebody sent him a letter and said, "Look here, you are Lear's descendant. You're a fine, strong, decent man. You've got an army. For God's sake, come and do something about Britain." And because we are in anarchy here. And so he did. He gathered his army. It took him about 25 years. He gathered together bands of Trojan refugees and brought them here, quelled the civil war, hence the warlike, very well earned sobriquet. And there he is, slap bang in the genealogies at the right time, with a son called Camber, moreover. And of course, being a Welsh genealogy, it won't have included the other sons. One was Albyne, who took over Scotland, and the other was Locrine, who was sovereign paramount after Brutus for about 20 years, I think. And then we come to the famous Belinus and Brennus, who again ruled together for, and Belinus it was who founded the Tower of London.
Right. So now we're coming to London, because you have a really interesting section about London in the book. Looking at places such as Guildhall and you have London Stone and various other places. So and also, so you mentioned that historians are very reticent to attribute the age of London to anything. Brutus's time, but there's proof.
I would call it proof, yes, and it lies in the geology. Now, the custom of the Yule log, when you light the new year in from the embers of the old.
Yeah.
Well, what they did was to take this pedestal from the temple at Troy on the Gog Magog hills, and they after the collapse of Troy, which was about 1150 BC, and they lugged this monolith all the way to the left bank of the Thames, where the Walbrook meets the Thames, and they planted it. And it was supposed in the like the Yule log thing, and it's very difficult condensing. I can't condensing this book into 1 hour is next to impossible. But
we can have another chat at another time and continue.
Yes. I'll just briefly explain about London Stone, if I may, because it's got all sorts of funny explanations for it. It's a Roman milestone. It was a mounting block, and was it heck any of those things? And that the answer lies in the geology. Now, if it had been brought from Troy in Anatolia, which is highly unlikely, because the Troy in Anatolia didn't collapse until 650 BC, it would have been very difficult to bring it on a light wooden boat. I dare say they could have managed it, but that's not what happened. And the reason I can say that with confidence is because London Stone is made of a very certain sort of limestone from a place called Clipsham.
Mm-hmm.
And Clipsham is just north of the Gog Magog Hills. There is a seam of Clipsham limestone.
Okay.
And although the Gog Magog Hills themselves are chalk, which has very conductive properties, so a very spiritual place, you'd be able easily to sense the earth energies there, and a mount, of course, a mound. But there is no seam of limestone anywhere near Hisarlik, the Anatolian Troy. So I think they built their temple out of this Clipsham limestone, and when Troy fell in about 1150, they took it and planted it, and it became London Stone.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it's under Cannon Street to this day.
Mm-hmm. And so you should probably just briefly mention the idea of Troy in Cambridgeshire, because that could be surprising to many people.
Yeah, well, again, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say, because the really hard work was done by a Dutchman who, alas, is no longer alive, called Imman Wilkins. And he wrote Where Troy Once Stood, which is a superlative book in many, many ways. I don't agree with absolutely everything, but for the most part, he takes all the logographical evidence, that is the evidence from the river names. He takes the meteorological evidence from what the Iliad says about tides. There aren't any tides in the Aegean. And this has been noted from Thucydides onwards. There have been dozens of historians who've said, I'm sorry, but the original Troy was not at Hisarlik. So I put the theory that there were actually 2 destructions of Troy. In fact, there were 3, but there was another one much, much earlier in about, I'm getting my dates muddled, 3000 BC, so twice as far again as Albyne. So there was an Hisarlik Troy, long, 5,000 years ago.
Yeah. And
then people came to Britain and either built or rebuilt Troy on the Gog Magog Hills, and that was razed to the ground in 1150 BC. And meanwhile, Troy and Hisarlik, as you'll know if you've ever studied the findings there, there's layer upon layer upon layer of foundations and buildings there. So it was destroyed and rebuilt many, many, many times. And last of all, in about 650, which is exactly when Wilson and Blackett say it was destroyed. So there are two really important destructions of Troy, and another one far further back that I haven't found anything about. Lawrence Waddle is the real expert on that. But yes, Imman Wilkins.
I think I need to read that.
You must. Yes, do. A really excellent book. So what really did it for me was 2 things, actually. First of all, finding out how important Delphi was, both to the Britons and to the Sumerians. And I can explain, we're running out of time a bit. But the other thing was I found a legend which was mentioned very, very briefly and not in full by... a publicity little leaflet thing for the Gog Magog Hills, for Wanderbury Ring. And it described the Lady of Shudder, the Lady Shudder. Now, this might not mean much to anybody, but Albyne's deity back in Sumer was the god Shuda. And at the foot of Troy, where Troy was, is a village that stands to this day called Shudi Camps. Now, it was little things like that, which, you've got to be really careful about calling this evidence. But if you see a pond and there are ripples on it, that is evidence that the surface has been broken. We're not quite sure by what. We have to go digging for it. But if I see ripples on water, I know that something's broken the surface. It's the same with this. So
not about a single piece of evidence, though. It's about building up a picture, which is what you've done.
Yes, always keeping in mind the likelihood. Sumer and Britain have been connected for far longer than we think. And the middle ground is Delphi. And again, there's a long chapter in this about how I discovered that. The evidence is all there in Plutarch.
Right.
And lots of this stuff is just thrown away. For example, in footnotes, in finding the Euphrates and the Tigris in Surrey, if you please. How did I find that? It was in a minute little footnote in Nicholas Barton's book. I mean, he didn't know how important that was going to be, but that true scholar, although he didn't understand it at the time,
popped it in.
He wrote it down.
Yeah.
Nerds like me to find 40 years, 50 years later, and it was the key to the whole thing.
Yeah, or the gold that's in a footnote.
Yes. The footnotes and all the this is only legend. I mean, you should see how stuffy Holinshead is about his king list. He puts it in anyway, but he's so stuffy about it, and so was William Campbell.
Yeah,
and yet they kept repeating this business of, oh, she didn't, have forged a forged king. So he wasn't forged; he existed.
Yeah, and when you come across evidence like physical, tangible evidence, like London Stone, for example, what can that tell us? Just looking at this stone that, as you mentioned in your book, is probably buried deep underground with various layers and layers of silt and things. So what can a stone like that tell us about this ancient history?
I'm not sure why monoliths were erected. I think I have to be very careful how I put this. We all know about the masculine stones and the feminine stones. I think monoliths were masculine stones, and they were a conduit, a channel, again, a sort of focus point for Earth's energies. And I've written a book, a novel called Nighthawk, which is all about the Brutus story and its modern repercussions and so forth. And I talk about the Brutus stone, which is in Totnes, and how I think that is all you can see is the top. But London stone has actually had its head cut off. So if you go to, there's a bank somewhere, Chinese bank or something, and it's got a little sort of thing, and it's only about 18 inches by 9. That's just the capstone. I mean, they decapitated our stone, our precious identifying stone. Ireland has the stone on the hill of Tara. Scotland has all sorts of stones, and we have London stone. But again, the English, Ross used to say this, the English, the Scots sort of half remember who they were. The Welsh, thank God, do know who they were. The English, it has been crushed out of them completely. And as I see it, my job is to bring back the English, or rather the Lloygrian, sense of identity.
Well, we could repurpose that famous phrase of Graham Hancock's when he says a species with amnesia, but perhaps we are a nation with amnesia.
A nation, we are indeed a nation with amnesia. But the funny thing is, the knowledge is still there. It's just, how do we get at it? And there have been a number of really deep thinking people who are all written off as pseudo this and, nonsense. Like Robert Temple with the Sirius mystery and the Mars mystery. Now there is a wonderful book, absolutely amazing material in that. and Robert Sepper, who again approaches a very contentious subject with a scholarly degree of analysis. Your word.
Yeah.
This is the only way to do it. Please, let's open the doors and stop being so preconceived. There is a whole. We are the tip of the iceberg in England, absolutely the tip of the iceberg, and there's this massive, great structure under the surface. And actually, it isn't an iceberg; it's an island, and all linked. It's the bit of a mountain range, and it's all linked under the water. And my job is, and the job of people like yourself and indeed Paul Smith and Adrian Gilbert and Robert Temple and all these people to do the diving.
Yeah. I think there's no reason why that we should be entering now on a sort of a golden age of independent research, because, as you say, the material's there. There's so much that we can go through, so many footnotes, so many old encyclopedia entries, and I think you've done a fantastic job. So how about if we do this again sometime and we can go over. I'd absolutely love to. There's so much to talk about. So when you have a chance, perhaps we could we have another chat.
That would be grand. Thank you. I would just like to say how very exciting it is to see the old ways crumbling like a quicksand beneath the feet. Not our old ways, but the bad old ways of rigid academia. It's crumbling. The harder they clamp down, the quicker it'll crumble. So although things look very unstable, and indeed they are in some way, all we have to do is just step back from it and center ourselves and think there is something so much better coming, something that's true, something that is real, which we've been living a lie. This Roman history of ours is a complete lie.
Well, it's suppressing an awful lot of interesting information, and there's no reason why we shouldn't look at the facts, look at the evidence, rethink the way things have been thought and told, and keep it use our sense of our logos. You were talking about the logic.
Yes. But hard logic, the sort that my grandfather was taught, hard logic can be very cruel. And hard logic needs to be tempered with humanity and kindness, not suffocated or obscured.
That's true.
It's a very. I've tried to walk a tightrope between rationality and logic and intuition and a sort of heart feeling. The gut feeling you get when something fits in. Most academics say, "Oh, that's pure speculation, and why haven't you presented the opposing point of view?" Well, sometimes there is no opposing point of view. I've just hacked a path through a very, very, very thick jungle, and it's very untidy, this path. And I am hoping that there will be people coming along with specialities and disciplines who will pick up a bit, for example, pick up the London Stone. Sorry, not the London Stone, doesn't have a definite article for some reason. Pick up London Stone and go and do some real work on it. I can't do that. I've just, as I say, I'm a pathfinder, like the Lancasters during the war, who used to draw the flak and reveal the enemy positions. I'm a soldier's daughter, so this is, very important.
Well, that tightrope that you've walked hopefully will turn into a bridge. So I hope everyone will read this.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Marchell.
This has been great, and good luck with your own channel, and keep going. And maybe I'll do some interviews one day when I've got rid of my poor old Phoenix, who's fluttering a bit at the moment.
Luck on your Phoenix book, and look forward to it. But no, don't stress. You'll get there. So we're all looking forward to reading it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Marchell, and see you very soon.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Goodbye. Bye.
Thank you.